Pixelkin.
I'm Simone de Rochefort. I'm a video producer at Pixelkin.org. We are a website that writes about video games with a focus on families and how families can connect through playing together. And one of the things we get asked over and over and over again is how to get kids started in game design and whether designing games is a good activity for kids. And so we brought together this panel of awesome panelists to kind of talk about the various ways in which they teach game design and the tools that people can use to get started. So why don't you all introduce yourselves and talk about your program and what it teaches users. I'll start with you, Raymond.
Sure. Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Raymond Yan, and I'm with a private college in Redmond called Digipen Institute of Technology. And basically, we have programs for students who are looking to pursue a career as a game programmer. If they're interested in going to hardware, so computer engineering, fine art, game design, sound design. And so it's a 4-year program. We also have 2 graduate level programs. And then we have a whole bunch of K-12 programs that are really great ways for game developer wannabes to actually try it on for size. So I'm also involved with that.
That was awesome. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Sax. I'm the EP and studio manager for a title called Project Spark. I work for Xbox. Been working on Spark for about 4 years now. Spark is a game platform where everybody can get to make their own game, and when they've made the game, they can publish it. You can make it on PC, you can make it on Xbox One. We do touch games, mouse and keyboard, controller games. And whatever you make on your Xbox, you can play on PC and vice versa. We've been out for about 2 years now. There's hundreds of thousands of games that have been made by now, and our goal is just to keep inspiring creators.
Hi, I'm Jason Pace. I'm the director of the Digital Future Lab at the University of Washington, Bothell. We're an interactive media research and development group. Ina Braxton is my partner in that effort. We're a newer program, about 2.5 years old. Started at the same time as Bothell's interactive media design degree spun up, which is a bachelor's degree in all things interactive media. We use games as an investigational tool. We work on both entertainment-based commercial games, research games, games for education, serious games. And really, we're looking at all of the activities that go into making a game, the art, the design, the technical pieces, the business and the marketing. And we really focus on student identity and professional development within those disciplines and helping folks understand how they become part of much larger teams.
Oh, guess that's me then.
Take it away, Laker.
Oh boy. So yeah, hey, I'm Laker. I'm with Roblox. I'm a documentation support engineer. I've got a lot of hats. And yeah, Roblox is a game development platform. It's kind of aimed at sort of a younger audience. Most of our players are kind of middle school age. A lot of our developers are a little bit older, high school, early college. And yeah, we just kind of present a full package of game development. We want to make it really easy for people to get into games and start developing, playing, kind of whatever you want to pursue in game design. We want to kind of be a one-stop shop for a lot of that. And yeah, we've been around since 2006-ish, I think. And yeah, I think it's pretty cool.
As Jason Pace, our executive director, said, my name is Ina Braxton, and I'm the program manager at the Digital Future Lab. We do research and development into a variety of interactive technologies, as Jason mentioned earlier. I work primarily with interns in a really hands-on way, but kind of breaking them off into their roles specifically, whether that's as developers, designers, audio engineers, QA testers, and then work on how we can perfect that role and how they can kind of grow in that skill set. I also direct most of our music composition and all of our audio soundscapes.
So as you can see, we have a really big variety of professionals here. There are people who teach degree programs, people who are just running platforms where you can start making games in your home. I want to know where my panelists think that young game makers should ideally start learning. Like, does learning to make games start in a 4-year degree, or does it just kind of start when you start making games in your house? Let's start with you, Raymond. What do you think about where young game makers should ideally start?
Well, I think, I've been a game player all my life, and when I look at the tools that are out there, I'm actually playing with Project Spark right now. It's awesome. I mean, you don't have to go to university to start. In fact, if you want to be a game developer, you just start making games. There's a lot of resources out there. You can look online, where do you begin? Starting with analyzing games that you play, games that you like, and maybe even games that you don't like, trying to understand what's working, what's not. But the authoring tools that are available today, whether it's Roblox or Project Spark, these are just awesome. I mean, for even someone as young as 5, 6 years old to be able to sit down and actually start putting something on the screen. And when a lot of these tools you can actually export it to the different platforms. It's an amazing opportunity. So no, I certainly wouldn't wait until college to start. You can even go below that and start making traditional games, board games, dice games. You can go to Uncle's Games, you can buy dice, you can go online, you can buy game pieces, you can buy blank boards. At the end of the day, a lot of the games that we play as video game players, if you look at the mechanics, they actually start with the use of dice, sort of race to end mechanics, or global domination kind of mechanics. You can play Risk, you can play Chutes and Ladders, and you'll see a lot of similarities between what you see in those games and say like a Mario Kart type game. So I'm extremely jealous actually that those tools are available today. I wish I could have that when I was a little guy.
Yeah. How did you start making games?
So basically I was very fortunate. I was hired by a company called Digipen to do 3D animation graphics, and out of that, as Digipen grew, we actually started to work with a little known company called Nintendo. And so the idea was to establish a school that would train people here in the US. This was back in '94. And during that time, as we were doing more work, a lot of us started to do research for Nintendo. So, it's the time of the N64. A lot of us were trying to understand how we can produce 3D games better and faster. And out of that, many of us actually started to get pulled into Nintendo. So aside from my job at Digipen, I was actually involved as the head of art and design at Nintendo for about 10, 11 years making games. And my first game for Nintendo actually was a tic-tac-toe game.
Nice.
Believe it or not.
All right. Sax, do you have any advice on where young game makers should start learning? And maybe what skills they could learn first?
I don't think there's any wrong age to start.
Yeah.
Neither young nor old. I have very young kids and they've been making games since I can remember them walking. I started when I was 10 or 12. I realized that I really liked games, but I like pulling them apart more than I like playing them. And I spent a ton of time on just trying to understand how to make things jump, how to make joysticks move, how to disassemble. I think just curiosity, inspiring curiosity is the most important attribute. Similar to everybody else, there's an amazing amount of tools now, and a lot of them are free. I think that's an important distinction also. Both Project Spark is free, Roblox is free, but there's trial versions of Unity, trial versions of Unreal that you can all download. And there's no excuse for not doing it. I think it can be really overwhelming, and our advice is always find a community, find somebody you can lean on. Whatever your friends are doing, that's what you should do, because it means you have somebody to ask. I think that's the most important thing. When you do things as a community, it becomes so much easier.
Yeah. What about you, Jason? Do you have any?
So I started making games when I was about 8, and I made mazes as my first games. I was absolutely obsessed with creating mazes and then timing my poor mom as she would try and solve the maze. And so I was looking for that sweet spot, which is it hard enough to be frustrating in a good way and not so hard that she would just give up? And I think that one of the approaches the lab takes is simple is good when you're getting started, and that's whether you're 30 or 10, don't bite off an RTS game, right? So we use specifically incredibly simple, evergreen, casual game models as the base that we usually launch from when we start working on games. So this is anything from if you've played Zuma or Luxor, the sort of marble path matching game, or if you've played Super Breakout, the old school game where you're moving the paddle and bouncing the blocks, you would be amazed at how much potential to innovate on those incredibly simple game mechanics there is just by adding different kinds of power-ups. And so we take something where our students who have absolutely no idea what the game development process is all about, how art and audio sort of drive the experience forward and elevate it. And our goal is really just to get them into thinking about what it means to be a game, right? So what is a puzzle? How do you make a puzzle? It sounds so simple when you sit down and say, I'm going to make a puzzle. Or when you're playing a game and you're on a screen in an environment and you have to figure out how to get out of that environment. As it turns out, that is much like the game Go, a minute to learn, a lifetime to master, right? Those things are incredibly complex works of multi-dimensional art that involve sort of the aesthetics of the experience, sound cues, contextual environmental elements. So the simpler you can get, the better. Start out with a paddle and some blocks and just see how it plays if you add a different kind of block in there or something like that. And then also, I guess we really try to not overemphasize the tools at the very beginning because the tools are really daunting sometimes. It's very easy to say, oh, you know, Unity is freely available or easily available and Unreal Engine 4 has just gone free, but it takes, there's a high barrier to entry for folks who've never done this work before. The good news is after you've stumbled around for about a month and you feel nauseous because you have no idea what you're doing, usually everything snaps into place really fast and all of a sudden one day you realize kind of you know what you're doing. So I would say if you do download and mess around with the tools, do not be daunted if the first 30 days you feel like you are in completely over your head, because there will typically be a magical transformation place where you feel like you know what you're doing. But generally, I think our rule of thumb is keep it as simple and basic and elemental as possible, especially if you are working alone and you want to investigate, like, how do I do my own art? How do I add my own sound effects? Those are a lot of tasks that add up really quickly. So super simple is quick. And also using environments that have a lot of prefab assets that you can pull in and just mix and match in different ways is also a really interesting approach.
Which is kind of where Project Spark and Roblox come in. And actually, I think you struck on something very important in your anecdote about your mother, which is having people play your games and test them out. That can reveal all kinds of things that you never even thought were wrong with your game, which doesn't make it bad, it just makes it unfinished. Laker and Ina, do you have anything to add about where young game makers can start and what they should think about as they're starting to make games?
Yeah, well, I mean, to kind of go off of a point you were just making about pulling in things that people have already made, usually there's a wealth of materials out there on a lot of different platforms, like a lot of, just use Roblox for an example. We have a big asset library of just a whole bunch of models that people have already made that already have like scripted behaviors or already crafted really nicely. And not only can you use those to just pull use those sort of things to pull into your games, and often use those as kind of inspirations of how you can do those sort of things yourself. And a lot of platforms will have lots of templates, or there'll be lots of tutorials online where you can use it for inspiration. You don't have to just dive in and just have to learn code or learn a tool just by kind of guessing and randomly clicking. A lot of times you want to be inspired by what other people have made. And there's a lot of resources and lots of learning tools online, like YouTube is a great place, where just lots of professionals or even just users, hobbyists, have lots of different lessons and tutorials on how to achieve certain tasks or how to get started. So you're definitely not alone. You don't have to just dive in blind, take a tool at random and go, let's just see how I do this. There's lots of people that are out there trying to help you get started, so definitely keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. So I definitely came to video games in a non-traditional route, and I didn't start like even looking into these until I got hired at the lab, like 2.5 years ago. Although I had played video games, I didn't really understand how any of the inner workings worked. So my experience with like making games was all of the imaginative play that I did as a young girl. I come from a performance background. I grew up doing dance and musical performance on stage. And all of that stuff like lends itself to game making, because when you're creating these imaginary like worlds where you have these rich character sets and these rules that you can play by, that's all games. And it all feeds into what you then create in a digital environment. And coming from a performance background, games are very performative. If you're not paying attention to the performance aspect in games, you're probably making boring games. So, like...
Shots fired.
Truth bombs. But definitely don't just rely on these digital things. I think those are amazing. We have as you were referencing, we have a digital tutors subscription that has the subscription gives you like umpteen million opportunities to just watch other people's videos on any number of softwares. Those are great. Don't just rely on those things. We need to bring in the human to these things. Most of the best games that are made are engaging in a performance element. They bring in sound cues. They bring in storylines and narratives that pull at your human heart. And that's why you're willing to play them for 6 to 8 to 12 hours straight. If they didn't pull at your human heart, you would quickly disengage with it. So I would say, like, everything that these people said, yes, that's great. Those are all exactly what you should do as well. And develop your voice as a storyteller, as a narrative, as a performance artist. Develop the idea that you're creating a experience for your users to engage in. Definitely take theater classes, take writing classes, take poetry classes. Bring those things in. You're going to be a way more rich game designer if you are bringing in elements outside, all these creative stuff. Don't breeze past that because it's going to come into play. So many of the students that we have in here we pull from our integrated arts and sciences degree, we pull from computer science and software, we pull from interactive media and design. Everybody all across these different schools, we pull students in that have different skill sets that all come into play when you're building games. So don't breeze past all of that stuff, because if you can't write a story, you cannot make a game.
That was one of the points that one of our panelists yesterday at the Careers in Game Development, she said that, the advice that we often give to new game designers is play a lot of games, figure out what works and what doesn't. But part of that is also figuring out how not to just reiterate on what has been done a million times before. Play games so you know what people have done, and then try to find a new way to do something and not copy them completely. And I know that actually that ties into my next question, which is like, what about people who are coming into game design as adults or even as older teenagers? Like they might not have the background, and they might worry about having a background in math that's appropriate. They might worry about whether they have adequate experience to be a game designer. Do you think, what was that experience like for you, I guess? And do you have any advice for how to get older people as in like 18, into game design?
I think it was very terrifying at first for me, not having a tech background at all. So really having no understanding what was happening on the other side of the screen. That really, I cannot stress that enough. I had absolutely no clue. And I had to do a lot of background research on my days off. And I would say that's my biggest advice. It can be done. You just have to do extra research outside of when you're doing it. And you have to find your niche. Jason is awesome because he really allows not only myself, but the students that we bring in to really find where their skill sets match. I think if I really had a desire to study programming and become like the best programmer ever, he probably would have let me, but that would have been I would have had to, bust my butt to do that. That was not necessarily what I was going to do. We had other students and other people that we were around that could bring that expertise. But however, Jason quickly noticed that we didn't have a lot of people that were performance artists. We didn't have a lot of people that were musically talented. We didn't have a lot of people that had ears that could hear just the tiniest little pin drop. We didn't have a lot of people that could organize these teams and set them up and set tasks for them and manage them in a way and watch our projects go from an idea all the way to completion. And so quickly he started to see where my skills in this field were going to be matched. And he didn't try and fit me into something that didn't work. So I think a lot of people just have to take the time to realize what they're bringing, the knowledge that they bring, and their natural talents are going to fit into this. This is just like any other business industry. You have to bring a lot of stuff into it.
Often in game design, you are working on teams, so there is a place kind of for different skill sets. Does anyone else want to tackle that? I'll just do open season so we can keep moving down my list of topics about older people getting into game design. Does anyone else have a thing to add? Silence.
I will say one thing. It's really important. If you look at most, let's say, AAA games, right, you see an overwhelming trend toward combat simulations. And to the point where so many of us now de facto assume that that's an equivalency. If you are a video game, you are doing some kind of combat. That is not true. Imagine an alternate universe where games never became combat simulations and they were all different kinds of puzzles or experiences or what have you, right? And I think that if you're an older student or if you're bringing a completely different skill set, that's really exciting, right? I mean, imagine creating completely different kind of games. There is no absolute rule or law that says if you dream and fantasize about a new kind of game experience that it must be similar to what exists today. And I think we often lose sight of that because the genres that we have are so codified and well-defined and tested over so many years that we all just sort of naturally default to making the same experiences over and over again. It's really exciting to step out of that mold, and you need different kinds of brains if you're going to do that, because if we've all been working in a certain kind of game for 30 years, we're all going to be making a certain kind of game.
On Spark, what's been really fun to see is like when you give people tools but you don't tell them what to make, like what do people make? And overwhelmingly, they don't make combat games. The most prevalent genre that we saw was storytelling games, and it was a return to like an era of 80s Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, that sort of thing, early Zelda, where it was about like the story, characters, quests, adventure, like things that have sort of been lost in a lot of the modern genres. But that is immediately what people return to. They want to tell a story. I think that, like for me, that was it's a very gratifying thing when you've been working for this long and you give people a tool and what they make with it is something you didn't expect. We've seen like a tremendous amount of interest in Rube Goldberg type games, where that are just physics simulations and just an attempt to make like the most elaborate way to turn on a TV. One of them, like the winner in one of the competitions we had, was it involved blowing up the moon, so the werewolf could transform back into a dog that could get out of the cage, that could run over and press the button. Like those types of things, I think give people the tools and have faith in humanity. Like that was our mantra when we started, and so far we crossed our fingers that there was anything left but combat simulators. And so feels that's plenty. And when you look upstairs in the Indiecade, like the rise of the indie movement could be seen as sort of a rebellion against evil. Games are not just these two mechanics repeated over and over again. They're actually way more. And there's a tremendous interest in that and commercial opportunities now that never existed before.
And I'm curious, what do you think is the average age range of Project Spark users?
It's about 20.
20?
About
Okay.
20 years old. We're between 15 and 35 is sort of a sweet spot, but about 20 is an average age. And most people, we've done surveys, about 50% of the people have never programmed it before, never done any games before. Of the ones that have, there's only about 10% that would consider themselves programmers.
Okay.
And the rest are just people that have dabbled a bit of high school classes and that sort of thing. But generally it's very, very low in previous experience.
All right, thank you. So when you start making a game, what is the very, very first thing that you think about? I'll pass that to you, Raymond.
It's a good question. I think what we certainly talk to our students about, and when we were at Nintendo, always we talked about what's the core experience that we're trying to deliver. So you really have to understand what platform you're aiming at. So you're trying to avoid that square peg round hole. If your platform can only support a simple 2D game with 8 colors, you look at the Game Boy Color, for example, long ago. I would never try and propose a game that was like Halo with 3D graphics and all of that. So, a lot of it is understanding the platform that you're going to deliver your idea onto, and to understand what the strengths of that platform are, what the weaknesses are, and then really think about the kind of experience that you can put together. And a lot of times I think of it like, you throw a party, right? You're creating an experience. And what kind of experience? It's not just inviting people. Who you invite is going to affect the experience. If you invite a bunch of intellectuals, right, versus a bunch of 10-year-old boys, the experience of that environment is going to be very different. How you invite the people, the kind of music that you play, the kind of food that you serve, those are all going to play an important part. So my recommendation always is really think about that core experience that you want to deliver, and then look at the platform, understand what that is, and then you start to push those pieces together.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'll just chime in. I think thinking of the question really broadly, like what inspires you, I think you can kind of launch off a lot of things. It's kind of the same question, like where do you start when you want to write a book? It's like, well, there's a million different answers for that. So for game design, whatever really just interests you, and again, kind of we've been talking about, it doesn't always have to be, oh, I want to make the next big fighting game. Games, it's a infinite space almost. So you can pretty much create any kind of experience or story that you want. Like on Roblox, one of our most successful ones came from a very simple thought of, what would it be like to make people role play working at a pizza parlor? And it's kind of like, it's not. I come from a game design background. I probably would not have thought of that. That would pass right by my head. But it's really succeeded on our platform. It's a really simple game. Everyone has a different job that it can choose, and it's just this really unique, little, interesting social experience. And it just really succeeded because it spoke to a lot of people who were really looking for doing that in a game space. And so really whatever kind of sparks your interest, either from your background or things that you're reading, movies that you're watching, music that you're listening to, anything that just sparks your imagination, I think is a really great entry point for game design.
Is that pizza parlor game single player or multiplayer?
It is multiplayer. It would be
awesome.
horrible single player. It would be very, very boring single player.
That's really cool. All right, anyone else have anything to add about starting to make a game?
Has anyone played the Stanley Parable here? So,
yeah, nice.
A really interesting question to ask yourself is, what was the impetus for that game? Anybody have any suggestions into what was going through the developers' crazy heads when they said, we want to make this? Exactly. I think that's kind of my answer, right? So right now, I have a personal project going on. Has anybody seen Twin Peaks?
Yes.
Okay, a couple people. So I want to create a really disturbing game based around the Black Lodge in Twin Peaks, which is this kind of weird limbo space where people are dead and not dead and strange things happen. And it probably won't have any traditional win condition or mechanic, but it will have certain kinds of environmental puzzles. That is completely different than the games we initiate in the lab, which are usually based on an interesting idea for a novel twist on a simple game mechanic. Very different than when I worked at Halo, which I did prior to this incarnation for many years, where we were really looking at sequels primarily, right? And so it was based around what kinds of stories we wanted to tell, and additionally, typically, what kinds of changes we wanted to make to the multiplayer experience. So really, these things come from any possible direction. They can be ideas you have for a story, ideas you have for colors or shapes, or ideas you have for puzzle mechanics, or even just a simple twist on a game you've played and loved. I think everything is fair game.
So it doesn't really matter what comes first, story or mechanics. It's kind of just...
It probably depends. I mean, if you are working on an established franchise, you are probably not going to go wildly off into the weeds with a new mechanic inspiration. But really,
we're going to do Halo, but it's going to be a visual novel.
We actually tried that. It didn't work out so well. Yeah, I mean, I think that it just, depending on where you're at and what your inspiration is, that's going to inform kind of the direction you take.
I think it's also, one thing to keep in mind when you're starting out is that the first game you make is probably not going to be very good. You kind of have to embrace that, because what I tend to find is that a lot of the students that we work with, they're trying to overthink it because they're worried that the first game is not going to be very good. It's just not going to be very good. It's when you're starting anything new, if you're learning to cook, it's not that you can't cook, but the first dishes you make are probably not going to be very tasty. They may be burnt. They may, who knows. So I think when you are, the message is pretty strong, right? Anyone can get into it. I mean, if this is what your passion is, you should dive into it. Start making games. Start with something simple, play test it, and expect that the changes are going to be made. Expect that it's going to be something that is kind of a living, it's almost like a living experiment. You're going to try something, it doesn't quite work. Okay, why didn't it work? Okay, let's try this mechanic. And so you'll kind of go back and forth. So again, I certainly encourage you to really take that step. But when you do make that step, understand that 3, 4, 10 times, 15 times you do it, it's not going to be right. And that's okay. You're going to learn a ton from those types of experiences. just don't sit there forever waiting for all the pieces to crystallize for you, because it just won't.
It'll never happen. Last November, I tried to make a text-based game, just a story. And I'm a writer, so I can write. This shouldn't be hard, right? I did not take into consideration how the story would expand exponentially with each branch. Like, depending, do you go left or right? Okay, from there you have a whole new world, and from there you have another huge world to explore. It just gets so big so quickly. So scalability is one thing, like kind of like you were saying, is definitely something that I would take into account when starting to make a game. What do you guys think is the most crucial piece of advice that you would give to young game makers, or perhaps old game makers?
Multiply every estimate by 20 or 30.
Ina, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would say I haven't met anybody to date who works by themselves making games. And I'm sure maybe there is people out there that can make a whole entire great, wonderful game all by them lonesome. But that sounds really boring and lonely. So I would say find your team and then find your project manager. So yeah, I'm a big believer in schedules. I know that doesn't sound very fun or interesting, but
talking about deadlines are great.
But I think working in teams is you're gonna have way more fun. Those failures are gonna feel less sharp if it's a shared experience. The possibilities to innovate are gonna go up when you're working with a team. And then find your project manager who's gonna schedule you, who's gonna task you out, find out what you need to do, what needs to happen first, where the work stoppage issues are, so that you can actually finish a project.
I spent a ton of time honing my skill when I grew up on these weekend demo competitions. This was before you had hackathons, but they were similar in the sense that a bunch of people get together in a high school and you have 48 hours from start to finish and you deliver a product, whatever you want to deliver really, that just needs to impress. And then you get rated, and if you win, you win. And we would do that over and over again. We would enter as many as we could, and we would see how many we could win. And I get the project manager, and I was not ready for that when I was 16, 18 years old. But what I was ready on was for 48 hours, give it everything. Don't sleep, don't do anything, get your team together, and just do it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Language.
And we did. And we did it over and over again. But the really exciting bit was where we saw everybody sort of doing the same thing as you and pulling the same issue, and you're learning from them. You get to see the same people again and again, and you get to see who's serious about this, who's not serious. And the team I started with was not the team I had on my third competition, on my fifth competition. By the 10th competition, I had a rockstar team. And all of us are still together now. We all make games. We're all in different companies and different places, and have started companies together. But it's still my base was formed in that period. And I think the hackathons are very, very similar to that in just getting in and doing it, and just honing your skill by keep doing it, and put yourself an artificial deadline that seems impossible. Just do it. You're going to learn a ton from that.
Another thing I think that's really helpful is making sure you're sharing what you've made with other people. So they can give you feedback and also give you encouragement. If you just sit in your room and make games all day, that's fine if that's what you want to do. But you'll really, really develop your skills when you have someone, critiquing your work or telling you, oh, hey, this is great, you should keep doing things like this. And so whether those are your friends, your parents, random people on the internet, just put yourself out there, make things, just as with all kinds of art, just, really go forward, try to be confident with what you've made. And, again, it's not going to be great when you start off, but those are the learning experiences you have to go through. And, getting other people involved with what you're making, even if they're not actually, helping you make it, that's a big part of the experience, and that can help out a lot, I think.
I think that's something you all have in common, is whether it's a university program or a platform where people build games, it always goes out to people, a group of people who can kind of give feedback and work on that together. And I'm wondering if you have any advice. I know working in teams, especially on games, can get really intense. There could be feuds over creative differences or over missed deadlines and things. Has that ever has working in a group ever backfired for you guys? And if so, how have you dealt with differences in game making teams? Creative differences, fighting differences.
Well, I think if you all agree you want to make something awesome, it makes it a lot easier.
All right.
So I don't think I've ever been on a team.
What if I want to make a crappy game?
Well, let's just say the group will freeze you out.
Yeah. There we go.
I think they're very self-organizing when you have a creative goal, and if you can agree on a basic creative goal, you can work with every type of personality. In my opinion, at least, that's been my experience. As long as you all agree that we're going to make something amazing. And it solves a ton of issues. I don't know how many teams I've worked with. I've made games for 20 odd years now, and it's all been a challenge. But that's the fun bit. If you don't want to be challenged, you shouldn't be in games.
Can I?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is where I put on my Rage Against the Machine university hat. So having been in AAA games for a long time, I'm sure many of you who follow the games press know that there is constant emotional turmoil in this business, right? Feuds happen all the time, companies are exploding all the time, frequently because personality differences, often because appropriate processes are not in place and appropriate roles and responsibilities aren't always enforced and defined. I would say that one of the best things we have done in the lab is specifically focused on developing a culture of creative differences, encouraging those differences, encouraging conflict resolution strategies when those differences happen, and making it so frequently in the games industry you'll see emotional arcs like this, right? Everybody at the concept phase will be incredibly happy, and then there's this huge crash and burn when you start realizing you can't build like 10% of what you were hoping you could build, and then feuds start happening and power struggles happen. The lab is growing pretty fast. We're at about 50 people now. And the potential is always there for those same kinds of turf wars, cliques, and alliances to happen, like the artists against the developers, against the business people. And we really just try to keep the emphasis on not trying to pretend that doesn't exist, looking for ways where we can help those creative differences be foregrounded and then move past them in a really healthy way that keeps the team strong. So I think that just understanding that in a creative atmosphere, you're not going to have something amazing if people don't pour their entire hearts and souls into it. And that's where, when you have people who've been working for 19 or 20 hours a day for 6 weeks and they're caffeinated and they're these really creative folks, you're going to have a lot of tension. If you can have everybody acknowledge that and have really healthy mechanisms in place to address that, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think I will definitely say that at our lab we've had a lot of, we haven't had explosive volcanic eruptions of conflict, but we've had some.
I remember the argument about the volcano.
It
was literally an argument about a volcano that lasted for 2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
But go on.
So I think even at that level, there's a tendency, like Jason said, you're a lot of creative people, a lot of creative minds in the same room working on the same thing, very passionate. That's bound to kind of spark some fires. A very simple thing that we've started doing, and this might just go without saying, is the use of whiteboards. So using whiteboards to explain, we were in an argument for about an hour about making an overworld map and how they wanted it to be made, before I finally was like, wait a second, everybody draw your map now. And they all had their little whiteboards and had to draw their map, put everything out, and then they had to show and talk about why they felt like theirs was the best. After they did that, then they had to go through and talk about what the points that they liked from each and everybody else's maps. And we gathered all those points together and then struck off all the ones that weren't listed out there. And that was the framework that we went for with that design. And so not only is it like conflict resolution, it's also like taking group consensus to some degree. But then it also just went down to like pure democracy. Like if nobody said that they liked what you wrote, then it wasn't going to make it on there. But it was also the idea that like a lot of times if we're up here using words and we're not putting a visual out, like we're talking about the totally two different things. And so just something simple of like, put it down on a paper or something so that everybody can see it and let's talk about it. And that saved us like so much time. And now it goes without saying that everything has to be like put out on a whiteboard in a visual template. Then we can discuss it. Then we can talk about it. And it's just cut across so much of our arguments.
Really awesome. I forget who has answered this question already. Anyone else have anything to add about working on teams? And actually, I mean, you work with college students as well. So have they ever had any big clashes, and how have you resolved that?
Yeah, I know at our college it's the same type of, production is the key. I mean, the industry doesn't hire because of your academic credentials here. I mean, this is an industry that is just, can you do it? So there'll be tests and things like that. So having opportunities for the students to work on projects together, certainly at Digipen, we also, right from year one, first semester, the students are very much involved with teams, and it's not uncommon for the teams to blow up. So if you're not doing your part of it, the deal at Digipen is you can be fired by your team. So the instructors don't really interfere with that. We just make sure that it's not just a personal thing, and it really does. Having everyone accountable to each other, I think, has been really key. And I really agree. If the team sits down and says, we really want to make a kick-ass game, that's the gold standard we're going to aim for, that actually does help, because then as the students bring their ideas forward, there's that fundamental question: does that add to the vision of what we're trying to achieve together? And often that will help with the team sort of getting past these choke points. But for sure, we certainly have teams that, for whatever reason, things don't work out, and that's very much a reality of what it's like in a business. So even when a team does fail, I think it's a great learning opportunity for the students in that project.
I want to open the floor up for questions, but before that, or actually, did you have a question? I saw your hand move.
Oh, good.
Okay, cool. Before that, I just want to ask you if there's any tension you think between that idea that of having a team come together to make an awesome game, but knowing that there are going to be flaws because they're students and they're learning and it's not going to be perfect. How have you had any trouble resolving those conflicts?
Well, I can tell you there are games I made at Nintendo that have flaws. I mean, I don't think you ever are able to make the perfect game. I mean, there's every game I ever made, including the tic-tac-toe game. But it's I think that's just part of it. They need to recognize that what we tell the students is, there's a certain point where you're hopefully going to understand what the expectation is of the audience, right? Of your target audience. You're shooting for this. So hopefully you're going to come in somewhere around here. If you can be in that region, which is above what they expected, then you're probably going to be okay. So that it's a reality check. I mean, the thing is, you never have enough time, you never have enough money, you never have enough resources to get this product out. I mean, most of the companies, anyways, we're making games not for the benefit of mankind, right? We're making games because we're trying to make money. So they can't just at some point that you have to account. In many situations you have to account for that. So that's certainly something we try and hammer home with the students.
Okay, cool. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes.
So, you guys have made it pretty clear that making a game tends to be a team endeavor. So let's say you're in your garage and you want to make a game and you say to yourself, okay, I can do this part and that part, but I don't know how to do those other parts. Like, let's say, I can write a great script, but I can't draw. So how do you go about putting a team together?
We've used Craigslist at the lab. I kid you not.
No, we have.
And it's worked out really well.
Yeah, that and even at the lab, we are growing in capacity, but to really find people, we just work on networks. So, we ask our students that are already our interns, hey, we're looking for X, Y, and Z. We're going to put out a call, but before we put that call out, do you know somebody who has this skill and would be a good culture fit for us? Networking is key. Go to events, meet people, talk to people. I remember last year I went to PAX. I went to an audio panel and was listening. One of the main things they said, the guys up there were like, look, I'm not really a social person, but in this industry, you have to network, you have to meet people, you have to put yourself out there. And I mean, he was saying that and also was talking about the fact that he's not a social person, but he really loves the work. And so part of the industry is getting out there and meeting people. And I think what I've seen is that there's a lot of other people out there that are looking for other people to collaborate with.
I think it's a ton of local shows, that's convenient and nice, but tons of games are made remote.
Yeah.
Twitter is a good place to find, because you can both post your work, to inspire people to what it is you want to make. It's much farther reaching, obviously, and there's always people that are looking to add to their portfolio if they think that what you can put together is something interesting. So I think there's never been an easier time to collaborate over Skype and today, a game like Ori that just came out is a highest rated Xbox One game, was made part Israel, part somewhere in Europe, part in the US. The people were together for some of the trade shows, but that's really it. They never saw each other. And it's one of the most beautiful, well choreographed games you're ever going to see.
What's it called?
Ori and the Blind Forest.
Yeah, Ori and the Blind
I
Forest.
wish I had a pen, I would write it down for you. Yeah. ORI and the Blind Forest.
But it's a 100% remote team. Most of the this is something that they've been working on for 3 years, sort of on their own. They just came together because they wanted to make something together. Right? Mm-hmm. They didn't have the level of convenience of being able to find a team in the neighborhood. And it worked out.
Mm-hmm. And for local things, some of the panelists yesterday were talking about how they just use meetup.com, and there are groups of indie devs who meet up and have coffee or whatever and just chat, and that might be another good venue to meet people if you're looking for local people. So.
Westside game developers meet once a month. Eastside game developers meet once a month. It's an open meetup. Anybody just come to the bar and can talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
It does mean, though, that you want to be on your absolute A game with the stuff that you do well.
Yeah.
So, take some extra time. If you have an idea for a script and an idea for a mechanic or a genre, really flesh that out to the point where you can give your 3-minute pitch to an artist or a developer to get them excited in such a way that they buy into your vision. We see a lot of the lab. There are no end and never an end to students who come in believing that they have an idea for the next great game, right? I hear that every single day. Almost all of them are completely wrong. However, some of them are not completely wrong, and those are the really interesting folks. And by a universal margin, the folks who get me interested are the folks who have thought through their idea past the 10,000-foot pie in the sky vision down to here's exactly how I see this rolling out and unfolding, and that's what makes us think, hey, there's probably something here that's signaling to me this person is somebody I would want in my team. This person really has the sort of passion and foresight to carry this through. Mm-hmm. So. Also,
PAX Dev is happening in late August, I think, and that you don't have to be affiliated with any company, I don't think, to sign up for PAX Dev. You just have to not be a journalist, which is why I'm not going. But yeah, so tickets for that are going on sale, and they have people in the industry giving panels and talks, and then I think there's also some networking stuff, and that could be a less terrifying way to start networking because you're not, walking into a group of people who know each other. You're walking into a conference where maybe no one knows each other, but actually in Seattle game industry, everyone does know each other. So that will always be a thing. Any more questions? Yeah.
Is it possible to develop a game by yourself?
When I was working on my text-based game last November, the thing that helped me most was just talking to my friend Keezy, sitting right over there, about it. And she wasn't, she was doing drawings of the game, but she wasn't doing, sitting with me and, writing it with me. But just, talking to her helped a lot. So even though I was working on it alone, technically, just having that person to kind of chat with made a huge difference. Again, that I didn't finish it though. So, does anyone else have any?
The majority of games in Spark are made by one person. I think it depends on what you want to make. Like my son's first game was a game where the character could triple jump and it had less gravity. For him, that was the game he wanted to make. It was a remix of somebody else's game. I think it depends on just where you start, and you can definitely get started. But if you're thinking you're making the next Call of Duty, you probably won't do it on your own.
Exactly. Flappy Bird, one person, right? So this is where keeping it simple is really where you want to focus on, especially if you're doing it yourself. You don't need to make World of Warcraft to make a really great game experience. Flappy Bird is seriously, it's like one small thing. And that's all you needed to get hundreds of thousands of people excited about that experience. So if you want to do it by yourself, think really simple art. You don't need super fancy art to be a really great experience. And a really simple mechanic that you can implement and test by yourself, and you can just take it and run. And maybe that's the thing that gets 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 other people interested, that then expands it out into a much more ambitious vision.
I think that's the great thing about Roblox, Project Spark, and things like the Little Big Planet level creator is that you don't need an artist. All the art is already there. You don't need to worry about that. You might not even need a programmer in cases, although Spark does help teach programming, if I'm not wrong.
Both that and
Roblox and Spark, yeah. But that's a good way to start, because if you're getting in on the bottom level, you're learning it yourself, and in that way you can put something out that's polished and cool without needing all those tons and tons of people working on assets. Does anyone else have a...
And I mean, working by yourself, I mean, even if you work on a team, I think working by yourself can be great. Just, I mean, on every project I've worked on, every team, every company, I've always had side things that I'm doing on my own, just little experiments I'm trying out, little tiny games. Again, the kind of scope, the scale, usually smaller than a big grand vision. So I think there can be a lot of value out of working on your own, just in terms of you just practicing and honing your skills.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, our audience participation award winner.
I'm just wondering, this can usually be an uncomfortable question to answer, but how well does working in companies in the industry pay?
That is totally dependent on the company. Yeah. If you get a job at a AAA studio, right, you're typically going to have considerable experience. You might be one of the top people in your field. You're going to do quite well. If you are working in a scrappy garage studio where everybody is just trying to eat, you could spend 3 years terrified that you're not going to be able to eat. So, I mean, it's really all over the map.
Does anyone else have any experience with that? Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise. So.
I think if your primary motivation to enter games is money, then it's not a good idea. That said, there's a tremendous amount of money in games. So it's sort of this weird dichotomy. What I've seen in my 20 plus years is that like it's become a lot more organized, and I think you can sort of define your level of risk. If you come through an organization like Digipen and you go through an internship at something like Xbox and you get hired through that placement route, well, it's a tremendously safe career in many ways compared to many, many other careers. If you want to go it alone and make your own game and start from scratch, then there's a high level of uncertainty there, obviously. But you can sort of pick and choose what you want, and I don't think there's any wrong answer. Like, about a third of the Project Spark team was made up of interns and college hires on purpose, because we were trying to do something new and we needed people that wanted to break the convention, not just do the same thing over and over again. But also sort of reaffirmed my belief that like how important it is to get people that haven't made a ton of games before and people that don't have a ton of experience, because they'll challenge you in every step of the way. They don't believe in hierarchy. That's a great thing, right? Because they'll come up to anybody and just go, I think you're wrong. And it's up to me to sort of go, well, maybe like explain to me why I'm wrong, and we can have a discussion about it. And those things are really exciting, because it's the first time I can remember where the schools are trying out candidates that are now so good and have the level of confidence they can actually come in and be incredibly productive, like from the first year on big teams.
So you could imagine, I think at a company the size of a Microsoft or an EA, you could have an associate producer coming in the 70s or above. And if you're working at a small little studio, you might be getting 26 or 27. So think of something like that kind of spread.
We had a guy on the panel yesterday that had worked at Microsoft, and he said, I was making more money than I knew what to do with. And then he left Microsoft because he wanted to work at a small indie studio, and he wanted to do something that he could really have his hands in. And so I think everyone's experience is different. And in Roblox, people have actually made money in that game, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have developers who are cashing out quite a bit. I mean, there's some folks who are putting themselves through school off the proceeds they're making from games in Roblox. And so there are definitely some really great success stories there. I mean, I don't want to mislead you, it's not a majority of the population. Yeah, again, it can be kind of hit or miss, it's a big gamble, but if it does work, it can work really well. Mm-hmm. And even, I mean, again, there's different levels of commitment you can put into it. Like Roblox, I see is a really great way for like a lot of people, like high school, early college. It's kind of a nice side job, even. I mean, because again, there's a lot of things that are done for you. It's really easy to just jump in, prototype, publish your games, get it out there, and maybe even make a little bit of money on the side. It's possibly not, in most cases, not enough for a full-time career, but it can be a nice sort of thing to supplement your income and also use as maybe like it can lead you toward like portfolio pieces. Like one person in Roblox I know, he took his game very popular, you might have heard of it, Epoch Rising, and one of the developers, he used that as his portfolio to get into MIT. And nice. Yeah, so you can use it to go in a lot of different places, both professionally and even if it's just sort of a part-time sort of thing.
I remember reading the Little Big Planet has a level creator, and I swear I talk about this all the time, but when they were making Little Big Planet 2, some of the people that they hired were fans who had made really amazing levels in that level creator. So if there is a platform that allows users to mess with it, aside from just using it to hone your skills, it may lead into something surprising, and it can always be a portfolio project. Everything can be a portfolio project.
Yeah, we have 3 of our team members in Spark came from the community.
Nice.
One at a time. Some of them started on the forums and then sort of worked their way in. Some of them started by just making games and posting them, and all of them just became active in like as a voice of Spark and had really like a keen interest. And over time, we just felt they were indispensable for the product because they just knew so much. They knew more than most of the team, and they moved in from all over the country and is an integral part of the team. One of them is now one of the designers on the team. Has moved from sort of being a community person to being one of the designers on the team. So I think there's a lot of non-traditional ways to get in, but they all start with just passion and determination, and like teams pick up on that very fast.
I would say passion, talent, and luck, right place, right time. It's kind of the same question, like if you say, how much can I make if I'm an actor, right? I mean, well, you can make $1 billion or you can wait tables for the rest of your life, right? It's any of those, or how much can I make as a musician, right? These are fundamentally hit-driven creative industry, as I'm sure you've heard before. And so there's a little bit of timing, there's a little bit of talent, and there's a little bit of like just sheer determination.
Nice. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I heard a couple of different answers here, and it sounded, and I could be wrong, it sounded like you use a waterfall methodology for your game development, and Zach sounded more of a agile, lean type methodology. Do you guys have a preferred methodology for game design and game development in your guys' respective studios?
Yeah. Well, we're at the university, and our main goal is really about professional development for students that are in their last 2 years of their bachelor's degree. So 48-hour game jams. A lot of our students participate in those on their own time. They do that all the time.
We are fully Scrum based, though.
Oh yeah, and we are very.
Can you explain what Scrum is?
So we do our Monday morning stand-up, or not morning anymore, it was morning, it isn't this quarter.
Every week we have a playable build.
Yeah, every week we have a playable build, we have daily deliverables, we have project meetings throughout the week, and Friday is our big, like, kind of, I was about to say come to Jesus, but it is basically come to Jesus moment. And so where you come, and maybe I'm Jesus in that scenario, and you show me what you've been doing all week long. But and we use we're on Asana right now as far as our project management. So we have
Everybody knows what Asana is?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's a task tracking software that you can use. We have under 15 members, and so it's free. It's awesome. And you can turn on extras where, like, if you mark off a task, a unicorn jumps across your screen. Yeah. So, we because of being situated within the university, we have kind of a burden of really looking at a whole quarter, like 12-week development cycles that we work on. And from there, we kind of pitch that out to, like, really what are we going to do for the whole academic year? And that's, I feel really comfortable with that. Again, though, I came to this very late, and I'm in the university, so my understanding of how things should work are very different. I'm also a project manager, so I think in a very like week to week, day to day, task to task mentality about these projects.
We generally follow quite an agile schedule, 3-week sprints, and where the both dev designers, all categories have like a lot of freedom in how they take on their tasks, and then the project managers just sort of manage against the overall scope, date, all that stuff. We try to keep that out of everybody's hair on a daily basis. So we prefer the agile side of it. I think the waterfall has over time proven to be quite a noose for most teams. So there's that.
Yeah. I think as our students graduate, that's our goal is to have them in that being able to function in an agile environment.
Yeah, the only reason why I thought I might have been wrong was because you started schedules, and it sounded like one of my project managers that I deal with, and I was like, okay, and then we went to Gameathon, so it sounded like apples and oranges, but it's the same.
Schedules for us, primarily, we talk about the pain of the academic calendar, which is when is finals week, when do they start disappearing, when are they most likely to be hungover, right? This is So we have this extra burden of student rhythms that really just makes Ina's life a living hell.
Yeah.
I thought that was what you meant when you said we're not having it in the morning.
Yeah, no. Yeah, and by morning I meant 10 a.m., which they felt was very early. It's now moved to 4 p.m., which everybody's a lot more comfortable with.
Oh, goodness. So I think we are at time, but do I have time to take more questions if people have them, or?
Yeah, it's up to you. It is 2:30.
It is 2:30. Does everyone want to leave, or do you have more questions?
Just take one.
One? Yeah.
It's just kind of related. In an agile environment, how does a team lead keep the ball rolling but not crush any creative ideas and kind of balance? What does that look like in an agile?
For us, it means that a good project manager will tell you what the trade-offs are. If you're going to take 2 more weeks, but you're still committed to showing something at E3 this summer, then something's got to give. So tell me what's got to give. They sort of let the team make the choice. Don't crush them with the choice, but let them make that trade-off themselves.
At Roblox, it's we don't have as much of a team lead management style. It's kind of more of a communal sort of get together because we have daily stand-ups. So we always know what everyone else is working on. We can kind of be each other's litmus tests in terms of, is this taking too long? Are we spending too many resources here? It's going to vary based on the team size, what your goals are. For us, it just kind of works, having a small team that's in constant communication with each other so that we're not just in our own little shell working on our projects. We are all aware of what's going on. We can kind of keep the big picture together with communication.
Cool. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed the exhibit. Go play all the games and